Okay, so welcome to the deep dive. Today we're looking at something pretty profound. This idea that could actually change how you experience your inner life, maybe completely.
Oh, wow. That's setting the bar pretty high.
Well, I think this concept deserves it. We're going to be diving into this idea that at its core, our consciousness, it's always still,
Hmm.
like a steady observer.
Yeah, I think I get that.
While our body, our mind, all that machinery that's always going, that's actually the part of us that's really engaged in the universe, all that constant activity.
That makes sense. So it's like we often think we are our thoughts and all the busyness, but this is saying maybe there's a deeper level, right?
Exactly. And what's really fascinating is, according to what we've been exploring, really grasping this difference. That's like a fundamental key to living a life that's joyful and liberated.
Okay, now that is intriguing. It seems like a lot of us spend so much energy trying to quiet our minds, Find that peace and quiet, like stopping those endless
Oh,
thoughts.
tell me about it.
Right. We try meditation, mindfulness, all sorts of things to reach that state of mental silence, like it's the Holy Grail or something.
Yeah.
But the material we've been looking at, specifically transcending action and inaction, it draws on the wisdom of the Gita for joyful living.
Oh, yeah, that's a rich source.
It really is, particularly verses 17 to 24 of chapter 4. Well, it suggests something different. It suggests that maybe the peace we want, it's not actually about stopping all that activity, but more about really understanding the nature of it.
The nature of it. And how it relates to our consciousness, right? That unchanging part of us.
You got it. That's the core of it.
So it sounds like our deep dive today has a pretty clear mission. We really want to understand what it looks like to live with joy. When you actually get this difference between the stillness of consciousness and our body-mind, which is, well, constantly moving.
Yeah, that's a big one. So, what are the signs? How can we spot someone who truly understands this? And how does that understanding change their life? And maybe even, offer a way for all of us to find more joy.
Right, right. Because if it's not about having a completely still mind, then where does that joy come from?
That's the question, isn't it? Well, the source material, it points out that waiting for a mind completely free of thoughts, that's likely to be a long wait.
Probably a never-ending one,
Well,
honestly.
you might be right. The real key, the real secret, it seems, is not about the absence of mental activity, but a really deep understanding of action itself. Like what it is and what it isn't in the context of our true nature.
Okay, so let's unpack that. What is this profound joy? Where does it come from if it's not about a quiet mind?
Well, according to the sources, it comes directly from this understanding we've been talking about. This separation, this distinction between the stillness of our consciousness and the constant movement, the never-ending activity of our body-mind complex.
Hmm.
When you really internalize this, you become free from that burden of guilt about past actions and the anxiety we often project onto the present and the future.
Oh, I feel that. The guilt and the anxiety, it's a lot to carry.
It really is. But if you can recognize that your essential self, it's this constant, steady awareness, then the thoughts, the emotions, the physical sensations, they all become something you can simply observe, not something that defines who you are completely.
That sounds incredibly freeing, like not being so caught up in the whirlwind of it all.
Exactly. It's like, imagine watching a movie. You see the story unfolding, but you don't actually think you are the characters on the screen.
Okay, I see that. So how does someone live, with this understanding? What do they actually do? How do they approach life? What are the signs, the hallmarks of this joyful, liberated person we're talking about?
Well, the text, it points out several characteristics. First, they act in a way that's described as desireless and purposeless, at least in the way we typically think of those words.
Desireless and purposeless. I mean, doesn't that sound a bit like apathy? Like they just don't care about anything.
Not quite. What it means is their deep understanding has, metaphorically speaking, burnt away those kinds of desires and purposes that are always seeking happiness or validation from outside themselves. They've found this sense of wholeness, this completeness within. So they don't need to chase external things to feel complete.
Okay, so it's not that they don't have desires or goals. It's more like the source of those desires is different.
Exactly. It's a subtle but really important point. You see, their actions, they're still prompted, but by something the text calls accumulated preferences. Imagine the universe expressing itself through them, rather than them acting out of a sense of personal lack or a desire for gain. They'll continue doing things they enjoy, things that are in line with their nature.
Okay. But wouldn't that mean their actions might not always make sense to other people, like to those of us who haven't quite grasped this understanding?
That's true. Their actions might not always appear conventionally useful. But others who share this wisdom, they'll recognize the harmony in those seemingly spontaneous actions. So the takeaway here isn't about stopping action altogether, but changing the motivation behind it. It's about doing things for the joy of it, not for external rewards.
So it's about intrinsic motivation, doing things because you love them, not because you're chasing some outcome.
Precisely. Now, another important characteristic is their profound sense of independence and contentment. They've reached the state where nothing in the external world holds a strong pull for them anymore.
Wow. That's a level of freedom most of us can only dream of.
Right. Because they're complete within, they experience this constant contentment. They see their body and mind almost as a luxury, something to experience, but not their fundamental identity.
It's like they're no longer attached to the outcomes of their actions.
You got it. And because of that, their actions don't create binding attachments. If they hit a roadblock, they can let go of the task easily without that clinging or frustration.
That must be so liberating. So much of our stress comes from that grip we have on how we think things should be.
Absolutely. Now, the text also highlights another fascinating aspect of this liberated person, their ability to perceive non-duality.
Okay, non-duality, that's a big one. Can you explain that a bit more?
Sure. It means they experience this underlying single reality, often called Atman or self. Think of it as the truest, deepest part of you, the part that never changes.
So like beyond all the changing thoughts and emotions and stuff.
Exactly. And for them, life becomes dreamlike. The separations and distinctions we normally see, they understand it's all part of one interconnected whole. They see the divine in everything, in everyone.
Wow.
And because of this shift in perception, the usual pairs of opposites, like success and failure, pleasure and pain, those things don't have the same power over them.
So it's not that they don't experience challenges, but their perspective is shifted, so those ups and downs don't throw them off balance.
Exactly. They still navigate life's ups and downs, but their inner peace, it remains steady. Now, there's a really important point here. They're fully aware that most people don't share this perception of non-duality, and that awareness leads to incredible tenderness and kindness towards others. They're committed to helping without causing harm, because they understand that others are still navigating the world through this lens of separation, which can lead to suffering.
That's a beautiful point. It's not about becoming detached or indifferent, but rather engaging with the world with more understanding and compassion.
Right. Now, the final characteristic we should touch on is that their actions don't bind them.
Don't bind them. How so?
Well, they act without a sense of doership, without that ego attachment that says, I'm the one in control, I'm the sole author of my actions. And because of that, they're not bound by karmic consequences in the traditional sense. It's like an actor on a stage. They fully embody the character, but they don't carry those burdens with them when the play is over.
That's a great analogy. So this all brings us back to that initial concept, the distinction between our still observing consciousness and the always active body-mind. Now, our source material, Transcending Action and Inaction, it delves deeper into this, specifically looking at verses 17 through 24. What are some of the key insights from there that can shed more light on this?
Well, those verses, they really highlight just how subtle the nature of action truly is. It's so easy to get caught up judging actions by their outward appearance or the results, labeling them good or bad, active or inactive. But the text, it suggests we need a much deeper understanding. It points out that true wisdom lies in seeing inaction in action and action in inaction.
Inaction in action and action in inaction. I have to admit, that sounds a bit like a riddle. Can you give us a more concrete example, something we can relate to?
Absolutely. Imagine a skilled surgeon. They're performing a complex operation. To anyone watching, it's a scene of intense action, focus, precision.
Yeah, high stakes.
But if that surgeon is totally present, operating purely from skill and knowledge, without that ego-driven anxiety about the outcome, then internally there's a sense of inaction. Their consciousness remains still, guiding the body-mind, but not getting tangled up in the drama of it all.
So outwardly there's action, but inwardly there's this stillness.
Precisely. Now imagine someone else. They're lying on a beach, seemingly inactive, but their mind is racing with worries, regrets, desires.
So physically still, but mentally A whirlwind of activity.
Exactly. It's the inner state that defines the true nature of the action, not just the physical activity.
So it's all about the space from which the action arises.
Exactly. Verse 19 states that one whose actions are free from desire, whose work isn't driven by selfish motives, the wise say their work has been burned up by the fire of perfect knowledge. It's about understanding our true nature and how that transforms our actions.
That's powerful. And the verses go on to describe someone who's let go of attachment to results, someone who's content, independent, yet fully engaged in life. It's like a portrait of someone who's always at peace, regardless of what's happening around them.
It is. They act with a controlled mind, without possessiveness, often simply to meet basic needs. And because their motives aren't selfish, they remain untouched by negative reactions or what we might call sinful consequences, content with whatever comes naturally, free from duality and envy, steady in success and failure, unentangled despite their actions.
So they're participating in life, but not bound by it.
Beautiful way to put it. Like, they're dancing, but their feet aren't glued to the floor. Now, the source material ends with a powerful image in verse 24. It describes Brahman, the ultimate reality, as the oblation, the offering, and the fire in a sacrifice. Can you touch on the significance of that?
I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
The idea is that when someone truly gets this understanding, they start to see the divine in all aspects of action. Their perception shifts to recognize the interconnectedness of everything. The offering, the act of offering, the fire, they're all seen as manifestations of Brahman, the same ultimate reality. And when our actions are done with this awareness, when we see the divine as the source of all activity, then our individual actions, done with this understanding, they merge with the total action of creation. And that leads to a sense of unity and liberation.
So to bring this all together for you, the listener, what are the key takeaways here? What makes someone who understands this distinction between consciousness and the body-mind different? And how does that understanding lead to a joyful, liberated life, not just for them, but potentially for all of us?
Well, as we've talked about, the key characteristics are acting without selfish desires, cultivating inner independence and contentment, perceiving the non-dual nature of reality, and experiencing freedom from being bound by the consequences of actions. And this understanding, it cultivates joy, because inner peace and contentment become the natural state, no longer dependent on external circumstances. It's about finding a wellspring of joy within, rooted in recognizing your true nature.
So it's a shift in perspective, away from controlling the external world, away from trying to control our thoughts, and toward recognizing this deeper aspect of ourselves that's always at peace, always watching.
Precisely. And from this place of inner stillness, the activity of the body-mind, it can be engaged with fully, but without the anxiety, the attachments, and the illusion of being the sole doer, all those things that often lead to suffering.
So as you reflect on all this, I want you to consider how even a small change in perspective might make a difference. Try shifting from identifying solely with your thoughts and actions to recognizing the still observing presence of your consciousness. How might that change your experience of daily life? How might it change your relationship to all the activity around you? What would it feel like to watch the movement of your body and mind without feeling like you are solely responsible for every single outcome, every single thought? It's a powerful question, and perhaps in exploring it, you might just find a path to a more joyful and liberated way of being. Thank you for joining us for this deep dive.